I don't have a legit intro for you because I'm not good at introductions. So, with that being said, if you do not know who I am, let me introduce myself. I'm Andy Morales. I've been content creating for some time, but I didn't get recognized. I said recognized, didn't I? That's not a good start. Recognized until 2018, 2019, but I did not discover podcasting until 2020 during the pandemic. Jammed 'em Down is the name of this podcast. Jammed 'em Down was my original user handle name, which eventually became a community feature page, but then that eventually got rebranded as the Unraveled Influence. I am from Brooklyn. I live in New Jersey. I've been featured in Canvas Rebel. I've been featured in Bow Journey. I've done shows in Bayonne, New Jersey, poetry shows. And I have been content creating, I think I said that, for a while now. So, as far as the name Jammed 'em Down, I'm pretty much reverting back to my original user handle, which is the name of this podcast. So there it is. So for those who do know who I am, who are familiar with me, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Just be warned, I might say things that are a little bit uncomfortable. I might say some things that people will not like, and I'm okay with that. It's not to start trouble or drama. It's just to speak truth. We could agree to disagree, and it is what it is. So there are a lot of things, I don't want to say a lot, but there's like some things that turned me off from the poetry community, but there are also things that I enjoy about the poetry community, which is why it's like a love-hate relationship sometimes. It's not everybody, it's just certain, it's just a lot of people, I guess, and it is what it is. But I've discovered so many things outside of it through the Instagram poetry community. I've been able to make some friends. I've been able to enjoy and explore different realms of life through that. That's sometimes it's just outside of poetry, and I'm okay with that. I love creating content. I love designing, and I can't just sit at home, do nothing when I'm always constantly doing something. And one day I got inspired. I said, you know what? I'm going to just go and do it because podcasting seems to be the most interesting thing here. I'm telling myself, oh, no one's getting it. And I don't get it. So I'm going to just talk. The purpose of this podcast is pretty much just to have fun with it. I'm going to rant. I'm going to talk. I'm going to explore, I guess, if that makes sense. But also I'm going to invite people because I meet people every day. I am a concierge at a residential building, and I meet people all the time. And so many things have taken place at my current job, which I enjoy, that has made me inspired to return to content creating and to start doing podcasting again. So that's for both people who know me and people who don't know me. So for those who do know who I am, this is an introductory episode. So thank you for tuning in. And we're going to see where this goes. So when it comes to the poetry community, I'm going to be honest. So I'm going to try to say what I'm going to say without getting mad. Without coming off like I'm taking it a little bit personal. But a lot of things have happened throughout the years of the poetry community since I've been around, since 2018, that has really turned me off a little bit. You know, for the most part, my experience was more positive than negative, but I've had some negative connotations come my way. Before I get into the negatives and what turned me off, I can't ignore the positives. Because I did have a lot more positive than negatives. It's just there were negatives that outweighed the positive that turned me off. Because had it not been for the poetry community, I wouldn't have been able to build any kind of audience. I wouldn't have been able to be creative. I wouldn't have been able to get inspired. Jammed 'em Down, the platform, before it became Unraveled Influence, the platform, wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been able to create an in-person open mic on the, in Bayonne, New Jersey. I wouldn't have been able to meet people, to collaborate with people to the point that I became features in different spaces, right? Because between Pennsylvania and Frederick, Maryland, I wouldn't have met Florence. I wouldn't have met Lene and Slow Mo the Poet. I wouldn't have met Damian Rucci and Scott Ladowdy. Like, I wouldn't have met them had it not been for this. I wouldn't have met Matthew King. I would have met him if it wasn't for the poetry community, and they all introduced me to these elements and those of the poetry community that inspired me to want to write and to expand my writing. And yes, I am a born again Christian. I am a man of God. At least I try to live in His ways, but in reality, I don't get that right all the time. And the truth is, without the poetry community, I wouldn't have been able to even know I was even able to do graphic designing. It seems like graphic designing has become more simpler than has been from years ago, maybe early 2000s and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's because of the poetry community I was able to expand my mind. So I can't 100% talk about the negatives without mentioning the positives behind that. I wouldn't have met a lot of people who I still talk to this very day, and reconnect and to connect to this very day. Like, I reconnected with a lot of people when I came back, and I can't ignore all that. So again, I got to be a part of Noble Quills. I got to be a part of Poetry is Promise. I got to see Poet Palooza for the first time in my life, and I went to the second one. I wouldn't have met Magnus. I wouldn't have met Florence and Dalton and Darian. Like me, Darian, Florence, and Dalton. We would have never created Unraveled Conversations if it wasn't for the poetry community. And that, again, I found my love for podcasting and content creating through that. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the poetry community. So I can't get 100% mad. I can't get 100% disappointed if things didn't work out. Because sometimes what doesn't work doesn't mean you failed. It just means that maybe that project or that thing you worked on just didn't work anymore. Maybe that thing failed. And I'm okay with that. It's discouraging because there were times where I felt like I didn't want to do it anymore. But there's always my wife, always pushing me and pulling me to the right direction. There's always my wife. And the greatest thing she told me, so that thing didn't work. Okay, try something else until you find the thing that works. Consistency is key, and that's also a difficult thing for me. There is such thing as burnout, and that's the truth. And that's the thing. I got to see culture outside of what I've known. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I live in Bayonne, New Jersey. And outside of that, I've been able to see culture. I went to Red Bank, New Jersey for the first time in 2024. I reconnected with my global history teacher through Instagram. And I got to see my first and second Stacia show to support him. I went on the 27th of April. That was at the Bowery Ballroom, and I got introduced to new punk rock bands. And yes, I'm a born again Christian, and I know there's a whole debate about what Christians feel about secular music. Some things just don't affect me that way, or some things are just not serious to me that way. And I've had a lot of conversations and disagreements with it, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. I don't have to agree, and you don't have to agree. We could agree to disagree, and that's okay. There are some things that are very selective, and that's why I'm okay with having that conversation. Because the thing is, if you don't have those conversations, there might be a perspective that you've never seen before that you might learn from. And I think that's what's also missing in the poetry community. But regardless, if it wasn't for the poetry community, I wouldn't have been able to explore. So But in hindsight, there's always the negatives. I mean, I can't lie about that. I just don't like the fact that people don't want to talk about it, and people want to act like it doesn't exist. It does exist. Because a lot of things I'm going to talk about here, it did lead to Unraveled Influence pretty much just closing its doors. And one of those things, honestly, I think is the biggest thing of them all was the positive toxicity. Um, I don't know where to start with that, because just the idea that a person has to always maintain this positive attitude, like even in a difficult situation, even when you're in a uncomfortable space, and the idea that people, anything negative shouldn't be tolerated is like freaking ridiculous, because there's no such thing as being positive without the negative, right? Because some negatives can be turned to positives and it could benefit everybody else. But it's so harmful because you get into a place of denial that you start to emotionally struggle within yourself, and you lose your sense of identity. And I feel like that happens a lot in the poetry community. Like, here's my thing. Whenever I did cold reads, whenever I did go live, I didn't just support just anybody, right? I supported most people if I vibed with you. But I didn't, especially when I was doing the interviews at Unraveled Influence, I didn't just invite just anybody. I didn't just feature just anybody. I didn't just let just anybody in. And yes, I've made some mistakes. I did a lot of trial and error, especially in the beginning of my podcasting journey, when Jam Them Down was my original community page. And then I created the Unraveled Influence. But that's just me. I've always been real about that, and I always said it. I don't invite just anybody in. I don't just let anybody in. I don't support just anybody. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a born-again Christian and all this other stuff. Because there's stuff within the Christianity space that I don't agree with, that people behave in ways, because I feel like that's how church has become as well. And realistically, that is not true. In a sense, like, the whole look on the bright side, think positive, and, holier than thou. Like, it's not always like that. Because church hurt does exist. And people never want to talk about that, but that's a real thing. Community hurt exists. And I don't know. Like when it comes to the poetry space, it seems like so there are people who read just for the sake of reading, but you don't even know half the crap you're reading. And the thing is, okay, so how I know that people are just doing this? This is how you know people are doing it, because I was the kind of person that when I read a piece, I actually take the time to absorb it. I take the time to explain what caught my eyes with the piece, why did I want to read this piece, and what I enjoyed about it, but also what caught my eye, how did the piece speak to me? And people weren't doing that in 2018, 2019. Like, people weren't doing that. I don't know if there was other people beyond the other people, the popular people that were doing it, but I know I was the only one did that. I know Evening Poetry was another poet. She actually did that. Like, she would break down the piece and explain certain things. As a matter of fact, she's the one that inspired me to want to read and really sit down and explain. Brian Edwards was another one that he actually broke it down, but the problem was everything seemed to be very brief, because sometimes I love thought-provoking situations where even if we didn't get to all the pieces to read, but it would strike a conversation. That's true intimacy. And I feel like people are afraid to share their most vulnerable emotional pieces anymore. It seems like they want something where even if it's a negative piece, but they still put it in a positive light. And I'm not saying that's bad, but you're just doing that just to do that. And the reality is the idea that it's impossible to give an honest opinion is it's just absurd, you know, because using positive points to the point that you ignore how you feel is annoying. It's not real, and we must feel what's true. Like, you must just be real with yourself and say, look, I like, it's just what it is. But to say that w- our positive thoughts should be used to the point that you ignore how you truly feel is ridiculous. And I said it before, this happens a lot in church. Oh, you gotta have faith. You know, give it to God. And you know what? Sometimes that's not easy to give things to God. Because sometimes the pain of it is so difficult. And I really like to think this happens a lot in most spaces. But unfortunately, to say just stay positive, it's not real. I'm sorry, because there are times where depression is a real thing. Toxic positivity actually leads to depression because it gives people the falsehood that they're not allowed to feel what they feel, to the point that the reality of happiness might not exist. But can I tell you that happiness is not a lifestyle? It's just a temporary emotion. And realistically, the lifestyle you want to live is joyfulness. You want to live a joyful season in your life, but happiness is a temporary emotion. You want to feel joy. You want to feel peace, knowing that no matter what happens, you can live life knowing that you know it's not the end of the world. Happiness does not get you there. Peace of mind gets you there. And peace is not always quiet. And that's the reality in the poetry community that turns me off, because the minute you bring up something, because I remember a time where people legit used to bring awareness to things and it actually struck up a conversation. The problem was when people took those things way too far and putting people on blast and started airing dirty laundry. That's when it became a problem. And even though for the most part that stuff has decreased, it still exists one way or another. But it seems like that stuff does not allow people to be vulnerable in this truest form in the poetry realm, and those people don't get read. Because there are conversations that need to be had. There are situations that need to be spoken about. There's a right way and a wrong way to talk about that, and there's a respectful way and a disrespectful way to talk about that. But to pretend those things don't exist is like, it's a little bit ridiculous, because again, when it comes to the poetry, I didn't read just anybody. I didn't support just anybody. Like, if I actually featured you on my platform, it's because I legit enjoyed it, because I was all about the poetry. Facts. And sometimes being about the poetry means you have to spend money, depending on the circumstance, right? If you're, like in my case, when I was running shows in Bayonne, I was spending money, but this was, even though it was money I barely had, but it was money that I didn't mind losing, even if I got nothing back in return, because my events were always free. I was just about giving people the space to read their poetry, because I don't really know spots like that will let me do that for free. That's just the reality of it. I mean, I'm still working around, I'm walking around, still asking around to see where I can get some stuff done. This is why I haven't really planned any shows this year yet, hoping that maybe something good will come out of it. But that's just the reality, and I'm not afraid to admit that. You know, so that was definitely one problem I have. Another problem I have is the fact that people use poetry to either, indirectly talk crap about another person, or people use poetry just for the sake of writing poetry just so you can make money. Because there are people who do poetry for the wrong reasons. There are people who unfortunately want to take the poetry community and create a marketplace, sell your books, sell your merch. And I'm not saying that's bad. But if you're doing that just to do that, then that's an actual problem, because you got to understand something. The real reason why we do this is so we can build a connection with one another. That's it. It's to have a good time. And I'm not saying you can't have a good time, but what I'm saying is it's gotten to the point that all you care about is making money. All you care about is getting monetized. And I blame social media for that. I blame Rupi Kaur, Rudy Francisco, and Atticus for that. Because they have this idea that, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. But I'm pretty sure, although they're doing their poetry stuff, I'm pretty sure they have other projects that makes them the most money. I highly doubt that the only thing that's getting them by is just the poetry, is just the spoken word. I highly doubt that. And that's the illusion of the eye. That's the whole picture is worth 1,000 words comes into play. Because realistically, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. There's people who use poetry just to like see like what pussy they can get. Like like I've seen that happen, right? There's also negative toxicity where it's like, you have a messed up life or something, or you're not happy in your marriage, so you think maybe meeting people in the community and have fun with it, and thinking your husband's not gonna, or your wife's not gonna find out, and it's just freaking ludicrous to me. Like, the reason we do poetry is to share poetry, to build a connection, to have words. And again, I'm not saying you can't have an inspiring idea, but to just use that, to use only poetry for that, it's no, get out of here. And one of the craziest things that blow my mind, and this has been going on since 2018, since I jumped into the scene, is it seems like no matter what generation, it seems to be like it's more about a popularity contest than it is to build a community, to have togetherness. I remember times where, like, when Poets Anonymous specifically used to read poetry, like Brian Edwards and stuff like that, they used to read poetry. They like, they would read people's poetry, but they would have a conversation here and there. But people actually stayed for the lives. People stood there. They didn't care how late it was, because they made it fun. They made it intimate. Everybody was able to connect. That's how I remember poetry community was. And I'm not saying that people don't do that, but it's not a lot anymore. It's not the same way, from like, there's no true intimacy behind that. And I remember times where we would stay because sometimes somebody else's piece would strike up conversations, or sometimes during the chat, it was like a whole thing. And then sometimes even during the chat conversation, people would actually get inspired by something and write a piece about it. And it's like, you don't see that a lot anymore. And it sucks. It sucks because I was legit trying to bring that back. I was trying my best to do other things that people were not doing. I wasn't getting monetized for any of this stuff. Absolutely not. That's why when I came back in 2023 with the Unraveled Influence, I was trying to provide things that nobody else was doing, right? Because at the time, I was the only one that had the podcast. I would feature people through interviews, because I was all about, yeah, I like to read this person's piece, but I want to know the person behind the piece. I want to know what inspired them to write different pieces, and what inspired them to write in the way that they write. That's why I had all these interviews. That's why I was doing that. That's why Unraveled Influence was doing that, to the point that even when Unraveled Conversations came to be, we would have a good amount of people on the live. They would jump in open mic style. You could read a piece if you want, but you didn't have to read a piece. Sometimes just giving your thoughts. Not everybody always wanted to read their piece and be out. Sometimes they just wanted to just express themselves, because maybe there was no space for that. yeah, we struck up a conversation, but I don't want to jump in just to jump in just so I have to read a piece. I don't want to always read a piece. I'm sorry. And I know I'm not the only one that feels like that. There are people who legit felt that way and who currently feels the way I feel. I know that for a fact because I talk to a lot of these people during my DMs or even outside of Instagram, even to this very day, because me and a few people, we talk about that all the time. So when I decided to come back and hey, I'm doing podcasting, moving on, maybe I'll do some poetry along the way, but my main love and passion is the podcasting, is create stories and have conversations and however that look like. Then that's just what it is, you know? And the fact that I had a good amount of people saying, hey, I can't wait for this new thing, I'm gonna speak the truth. You know, I'm gonna do it in a way that it might offend some people, but I'm not bashing because I don't want to come off like I'm bashing. But with saying all that, you know, there's again, the popularity contest, the toxic positivity, the negative aspect of it, the marketplace, the gatekeeping. That was another thing that that turned me off. Like people found strategies to pull numbers in, and instead of trying to help one another reach a newer audience and have a diverse audience, the problem was people were always gatekeeping. Everybody wanted things for themselves. And the platforms that have the numbers, you know, that are saying, "Oh, it's not a competition. It's about the poetry." You guys are also part of the problem too because you guys come off like gatekeepers as well. And that's why I can connect with certain people because there are people who feel like I feel and they don't gatekeep at all. Like, hey, this is how I did it. I hope this works for you or whatever the case is. Now, as far as the unraveled influence goes, because I do have to talk about this, I'm guilty of it too. Because it got to the point that I was more focused on trying to get those things. I was so caught up in how I can draw numbers that people have turned this into a competition, right? Because I remember when Unraveled Influence first came to be, I had a good amount of numbers, right? Great. But then there were some people that didn't like that. And again, I'm not a gatekeeper. We can have a conversation, we could connect with each other. And it got to that point that maliciously they were trying to take me down. Now, eventually, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm not going to talk about that right now, only because I have other episodes that I'm collaborating with people that will touch this, but I'm going to leave that right there. People do things out of malicious intent to take somebody else down because if they can get the numbers, if they can get the popularity and kick these people to the curb, then that's the reality of it. Because I started to get caught up. Then I started to get caught up of who I can get and can this person draw numbers in so I can get the followers. But then, like, let's say I had 900 followers, but only 10 people out of the 900 was you know, showing up, or sometimes during the live it would decrease. And then I would get doubt, right? I would get to that point where, okay, what am I doing wrong? People are not staying anymore, or people are not doing this anymore. And I did start to feel that whole, oh, but I'm providing all this stuff. Like, why would you not want to support me on my stuff? Why would you not want to stay? Why would you not want to put me on blast as far as what I'm providing so I can share with other people, you know? And I've had random people hit me up, hey, how I can get featured. And some people I feature, some people I did not, because again, I don't just bring just anybody in. And it's one of those things like you have to be like that. But to become a gatekeeper is crazy. You know how you know I'm not a gatekeeper? Because I've done collaborations with Quote Keepers Press. I've done collaborations with Raw Earth Inc. Hello, like season 10 was my last season, and it was me and Raw Earth Inc. We did a collaboration with their authors and stuff. Authors. Why am I saying authors? Authors. To the point that, as a matter of fact, me and his other platform, Poetry is Promised, that was with Florence. Me and her did a collaboration show that featured both All Worlds together at Andrew's Cafe. Like, I'm not a gatekeeper. I don't mind collaborating. That's what I want. So I remember I had a conversation with Sammy B. And me and her will talk about this. Sammy, if you're listening, I'm just making a point here. And one thing for sure is she said that there are people, not everybody, but there are people in this life that won't go hard on something like this if they're not getting paid for it. If all you care about is just money only, then that's a problem to me. Right. And I'm not saying everybody, because there are some people sometimes, hey, like, I don't mind if I got the money, you know what, just as a thank you, I'll give you money. Like, I don't care about that. I can care less. I just don't like that people want to make it all about money and then they don't want to contribute. My whole thing is, if you knew you weren't getting paid, then, like, why would you even volunteer to do that, right? Because there are people who say they're a part of something, but then not actually do something just so they can say they're part of this thing, but then nothing happens. And I'm the kind of person, like, I'm not with that. I don't mind meeting people halfway. I say, hey, let's compromise. Let's meet people halfway, right? But then there's this idea that, let's say, because I know people who do shows, and sometimes they'll, I mean, not me, but I know people who have asked for donations for the shows and stuff like that, and the money does legit go to the platform. And the reality is, people would be like, oh, you're not about the community. No, just because you ask for money does not mean you're not about the community. You gotta understand something, especially when I was doing this, like when I was doing the shows in Bayonne, I paid money out of my pocket to do these shows, and there's not once have I asked for money. I did it because I actually enjoyed the poetry. I featured people because I actually wanted to give people an opportunity to, talk about their stuff and to read their pieces and to put their names out there. That's what I wanted to do. All my shows were always free. And I used to spend maybe $300, $200, $150 for each time I did a venue thing. I did it because I liked doing that. I mean, yeah, I would sell merch and some people bought, some people didn't. Okay, whatever. It is what it is. You know what I did? Whatever I had left over, I would give them away for free. Like, whatever. And that's okay. But people get bent out of shape if, God forbid, they don't make no profit. Like, that boggles the mind. That boggles my mind. But this was the truth of the matter. And it's like, that's all you care about? Like, that's crazy. So when me and Sammy was having a conversation, like, she was just saying there are, not her, but there are people who do think this way. So that's why, because she used to do poetry and paintings. That was her platform. And she loves to collaborate with people, but people always want something back in return. How about just doing it just to do it? And then it makes people like her not want to do her thing. And then it got to the point that, because people want to gatekeep everything, it gets me discouraged and it makes me not want to do nothing anymore. So, but to say that I'm not allowed to feel like that, or I'm not allowed, or we're not allowed to feel some type of way, or to, have a certain perspective on things is ridiculous. And that really turned me off. And once I saw myself getting into that realm of things, once I saw that I got more caught up in the numbers and what I can do, or how I can do it, or how who I could invite in to attract people. And there were people who went to my shows that always came back, right? And then there were certain people who I would have loved to have come back to my shows, and then they never show up, and then they ghost me. Like, that made me feel some type of way. But once I started feeling like that, once I saw that I was getting to that point, that's when I knew that I needed to take a break. That's when I knew, you know what, maybe I should reassess and reevaluate. I got through season 9, and I enjoyed season 9 because that was Unraveled sessions. I had Magnus, I had Embria, I had Jack, I had Jack Vout Trade, I had Poetic Rome, which I really enjoyed that interview. That interview, definitely check it out. But then at the same process of that, I was getting bullied by some people saying that what I was doing wasn't working. People are going to get mad. I don't care, because I'm not here to entertain people. I'm here to enjoy what I do. And the real people who still are here since the beginning, and even new people I've attracted, they know what I'm all about. They know who I'm all about. And that's why they still gravitate towards me. And I'm thankful for you guys. So I'm not talking about you guys. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the other niche that have it all wrong. The niche that they just doing it just to do it, but there's no real meaning or intimacy behind it. I'm talking about those people. So the people that know me, the people I'm close to, even outside of the poetry scene, that I met through the poetry scene, that we talk and conversate once in a while. I'm not talking about you guys. You guys are fine. I'm talking about the people who make things clicky, make things uncomfortable, who body shame, who poetry shame people. And let me tell you something. From all the years I've been there, we have lost a lot of great poets because of that. Because people got discouraged, people became fake, people got all bent out of shape because they didn't do things or they didn't get what they thought they were getting. And it sucks because I know certain poets who all they cared about was going live, and then they would get discouraged because they weren't getting back as much as they were given. But again, I also fell out of that category. And this is why, this is why things didn't work out. This is why I feel like, maybe I should reassess. And that's why when I made the post about, hey, I'm going to close their doors, because the reality is, realistically, platforming was not something I wanted to do anymore, because it's a challenge. So for anyone that wants to open up a platform for the first time, I warn you, be prepared for this stuff. I warn you, it is challenging, it's time consuming. And the thing is, I did feel like I wasted 3 to 4 years of my life because of this. I felt like I missed out on a lot of things that my son was doing because I wanted to go live, or like I could have spent a Sunday night or Sunday afternoon with my kid, but I wanted to go live and do interviews. And I did feel like it was taking me away from the things of God, to the fact that I got spiritually burnt out trying to consume everything. And I needed that. And I got to a point of depression. I said, you know what? Because, my older brother got on me about putting something on Facebook, on Instagram, about asking for prayer. But I said, listen, I don't care. Like, I want prayer. And the amount of love and prayer that people gave me. And that's why I needed to reassess. I needed to really reevaluate what was more important to my life. I love podcasting. I love doing content. I love what I do. But I needed to reassess my mind to see what's my priority. So when I decided to close the Unravel's doors, I decided, you know what? This is the better choice. Because I can still do content creating, whether it's poetry or just podcasting, doing whatever. Or I could do both. I still want to do poetry shows, because even though there's all this negative, there is a lot of positive that I got out of this. So I can't get 100% mad. These was just things that turned me off, because I still did my poetry thing. But there is such thing as burnout, But if I can be brutally honest here, I'm going to just keep this short and sweet, because I'm not going to get into the things, only because some people know, some people don't know, and I'm going to leave it as plain sight. The reality is this. Everybody that knows me when I first started Unraveled Influence, they know that Angela Murray was my co-host. I originally had Leon Jones, but things did not work out. He had his own real life stuff to worry about. And then it was just me and Angela, and we had a great time. I like to think that we shed some kind of light, and I enjoyed that. It's just, unfortunately, after a while, her and I had some disagreements. Her and I got to the point where we both had creative differences. She had a vision for what she wanted Unravel to be. I had a vision for what I wanted Unravel to be, and we would constantly clash. We would pretty much clash heads. We would just clash, and it got to the point where some things just weren't working anymore. That was one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the fact that while she was on, it got to the point that her personal problems became a reflection of the platform, and it just wasn't working anymore. And it got to the point that people got turned off by it, and people didn't want to pretty much fuck with us anymore. That's pretty much what it all came down to. And I couldn't have that anymore. We both, unfortunately, things went south, and it just wasn't working. And we had a little falling out. I have not spoken to her since. And she went to Origin of Thought, and I don't know what she's doing, because whatever, I don't talk to her. It is what it is. This is not slander. This is not putting people on blast. This is not airing out dirty laundry. That's just the truth. My wife is my witness. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are married or in a relationship, the number one rule that you could always live by is be 100% honest. Tell your wife everything, because my wife knows who all my friends are. She knows who all my girlfriends are. I know who her guy friends are, because the majority of my audience are females. I have some friends that are guys too, but the majority of them are women. I tell her everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. I'll give you a perfect example, and this is where the toxicity comes in, right? So when I got married, and even before I got married, I was struggling with sexual stuff, right? And I don't mean like cheating on my wife. No, I never cheated on my wife. I was pretty much struggling with pornography, with masturbation. Is pretty much what I was struggling with. Even in the beginning of my marriage, even though I knew my wife for many years, it got to the point that it was impossible for me to be intimate with my wife. And it's not that I'm not attracted to her. It's not that I didn't love her. It's the fact that in church, what they don't talk about, unfortunately, is the fact that when you get married, before you get married, you should denounce your stuff, right? You should legit, because real repentance is such a struggle. Repentance is not just saying I'm sorry. It's admitting you're wrong. It's knowing that you need Jesus. It's knowing that, you know what? Because once you get the deliverance, you also need the strategy to maintain the deliverance. And that's what people don't talk about. So unfortunately in church, they don't talk about the generational curses. They don't talk about the habitual sins that you go through. And I learned the hard way, because I believed that once I got married, all of that stuff I did when I was single, I wasn't going to need anymore. And I say this because I figured, I have a wife. I can have sex with my wife. I can do these things with my wife. She has everything I need. I don't need the porn anymore. I don't need to masturbate anymore. But boy, was I wrong. I was so wrong. And it did get to the point that I said, you know what? I can't keep doing this. If I want this relationship to work, I need to tell my wife. I actually sat down with her and I had the conversation with her. And all she did was hug me. See, that's the true unconditional sovereignty of Jesus Christ. That's the Lord our God. And that's for people who do believe in Jesus and all stuff like that. If you don't believe in Jesus, then obviously I don't expect you to understand that. But I actually sat down with her and I told her. And all she did was pray for me. Till this very day, there's still struggles that I deal with. But I'm 100% transparent with her. And she prays for me every day. We pray for each other. Because there's areas of her life that she struggles with that we both pray together. And that is extremely important. So husband, if you're married, tell your wife, and honesty is the best policy, no matter how much it hurts. And that's my advice, because not for nothing, if you're going to be married, honesty should always be there. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable the honesty is. And that's where the toxic positivity comes in, because to get into that denial mode and act like, everything's fine when it's really not, is not healthy for you. That leads to depression. Depression is real, because yes, I'm a born again Christian. I try my best to walk in the things of Jesus, and I don't even get that right. But the best thing you can do is be honest with yourself, be honest with God, and be honest with your significant other. I'm not saying it's easy, because it took me 1.5 years for me to earn her trust. See, that's what true fellowship is. And I feel like even that's missing in church, even that's missing in the poetry community. There's like the lack of transparency, and it kind of turns me off. I'm going to see who my real followers are, who my real friends are, and who are not my real friends. If you're just listening to me for the first time, thank you for listening. Thank you for getting this far into this episode. But other than this, there's not much I can say. If you want to follow me, jam them down on Instagram. This is Andy Morales on TikTok. So until next episode, it is what it is, and hope you join me for the ride.